Welcome to Trauma and Transcendence, where healing meets awakening. I'm Amanda M. Dodd, your guide on this transformative journey. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Let's transcend together. Good morning, soulful seekers. Well, morning for me, maybe evening for you. By the time that you hear this, I will be at a creative apothecary in the Salt Cave, and today is Akashic Records Day. I love Akashic Records Day. And the thing that I love about it is it doesn't matter where someone is in their spiritual practice. Now, in the past, I think it has had a lot of gatekeeping to it. And so it's not usually a metaphysical spiritual practice that people would jump right into without having had some guidance, some mentoring, some training, and things like that. But now, we're all a little more higher vibration. And so a lot of us are ready to go on those journeys and have those experiences. And I love to facilitate them. And every time I do, it is different. I don't think I've ever done an Akashic record meditation that has come out the same. We always explore different things. And a lot of it is very dependent on the group dynamic, too, of who's showing up and what do they need to work on today, and what things do we have as an overall theme for the group. So that is where I will be by the time that you get a chance to begin to hear this episode today. And I'm going to be enjoying it. But hopefully you enjoy what I've got to talk about today. As you can see, look at this camera. Yay! Now, it's nothing fancy. It's not like a 4K camera or, HD or anything like that. It is just a brand new webcam, but it was so needed. So no more gray, beige looking pixelated camera. So now you can actually see me. So that's exciting. That's happy. What else have I been doing? What else is new? I feel like I've been fairly quiet this week, just working on a lot of things. Oh, I have been productive. And then when I'm not productive, I'm trying to balance that whole work-life balance thing. You know how that goes. I don't know if we ever quite get there, to be honest. I feel like for me personally, I just have times when I'm uber productive. And then I'm like rebounding from the productivity of like, okay, I worked really hard. Now I'm going to take a couple of days to just balance it out. How is that for you? Do you do that? Do you have these cycles of lots of work and then a couple of days of I'm not doing anything because I'm exhausted, I'm depleted, or I'm recharging? It's a journey. That's something that I have always, I think, had a hard time with. I think I'm better with it now than I used to be. It used to be I would go and give and do until I absolutely crashed or was empty and had nothing left. And I would send myself right into burnout. So I think over the past few years, I've been able to catch it and not send myself into burnout. Sometimes I do get tired though. And it's like, I'm pushing too hard. I need a couple of days now. The funny thing is, when I finally give myself that permission to take that couple of days, my husband always laughs at me for this. He's like, why did you bother taking a day off? Because there's something so mentally seductive and freeing about it. That then I have opportunity to choose what I am doing, or at least that's what I'm telling myself differently. Then I get more work done sometimes. And so I might actually, he will encourage me often to take time off. He has a lot of leave from the military. And so sometimes he'll take like a week or two off. And I might join him for that first week. And so I will schedule those days off so that I can't be booked and just take that time for myself to rebalance. Inevitably, at least one or two of those days off, I'm going to be super productive from morning all the way until night. And that might just be a neurotypical thing. That could be an overcoming perfectionism codependent thing. Regardless, it's a thing I've been dealing with my whole life. So that's what that looks like for me. I don't know what that looks like for you, but I would be curious to hear. And are there things like checks and balances that help you kind of rein yourself in and have a more balanced approach? So always an interesting conversation. But I was productive. I did get some work done for the mediumship development group that I have and that I run. Previously, I had told you about the two classes that I was offering. The first one was the Clairs, where we spent, I think, an hour and 20 minutes talking about all of the Clairs in depth. And I did it in a way that I really hoped was going to make it so clear how natural and integrated these abilities are for each of us. And I really liked the outcome and how that came about, but I did finally make it available for purchase for anyone who had missed it. So that can be found now. I have it within my Etsy shop. I also prepared the second class, Vibration and Spiritual Protection. That was a good class too. That one was over an hour and 35 minutes. And I packed in as much information as I possibly could. So we talked about universal laws. We talked more about vibration, of course, and then spiritual protection techniques. And a lot of, I feel like I took it to a lot of places that most people don't go to on a daily basis. And so as I was teaching the class, I could see eyes getting bigger and bigger. Like you could just see like their heads kind of filling up with all of this insight and stuff to explore that perhaps they hadn't had the chance to really think about at that level of depth before. So that was interesting and fun. So that's also available now. So if you missed out on those and you'd like to check those out, I will add them to the show notes for you. They're available on Etsy. Each class, I think, is $22 at the moment. And I am building towards having a library of all of these mini classes for mediumship development so that as people want support, no matter where you're at in your journey, there will be some really wonderful resources available for you. The next class coming up is going to be on April 5th. If you'd like to join the live event, that's on Meetup. I would enjoy having you. I always love having live people bring your questions, your curiosities, because it's a chance for me to one-on-one dive in and really get to the root of some things. On that class, I will be guiding you, and there will be a beautiful, long meditative hypnotherapeutic practice to clear your mediumship channel. So that will be a really good night and something to integrate into your spiritual practice on a regular basis to keep your abilities open and running and aligned. So if you're interested, you can find that as well. If you head to like Meetup, I'm under Healing Beyond Trauma, or just my website. You can find it there too. So that's kind of what's been new and exciting. And next week coming up in the Salt Cave is quantum jumping. And that's a little bit different than everything else I do. Because in that one, well, I don't know, that's a hard comparison to make. Because sometimes with Akashic Records, we do step into a new reality for ourselves. The way that I work with quantum jumping is I show people various potentials. And then we try to integrate the highest, most aligned outcome that they would like and step into that. So there's potential within all of them. At the end of the day, if you don't know, I am always playing with vibration, with healing, and with making positive changes, regardless of what the session is or what I call it. That is always at the basis of it. I am like a quantum play child. I'm just out there playing on like all of the toys and things in the courtyard of vibration and frequency. Can't help it. That was just a starseed trait. We shall see. Either way, but that's what's up. That's what I've been doing. For today, I'd like to continue my origin story. And I've been waffling on this one a little bit because this one has been a little bit harder for me to talk about, particularly to talk about without tears. Sometimes it's got its challenges. So we'll see how this goes. When we last left off, I was talking about what it was like growing up with mediumship abilities and not quite understanding what they were. I began to have awareness that I was different. And so, particularly around the ages of like 6, 7, 8, it began to stand out more and more for me that I just did things differently than other people. And I think I've recounted already that at some point it did lead to a diagnosis of attention deficit. And that was because I was thoroughly distracted. I had so many sensory channels of input coming in that it was hard to focus on any one thing, particularly in the classroom. So at one point, I actually failed grade 2, and it was a lot of things. One, because there was some trauma that happened, but two, also because I was highly distracted. I had other traumas, so there was always a layer of distractibility, but then all of the sensory channels coming in that I was just aware of. And so often it wasn't uncommon for teachers to say that I was a daydreamer. Uh-huh. Yes. When we experience clairvoyance and claircognizance and some of those abilities, that is what it looks like we are doing on the outside. That is how someone might perceive that. And our daydreams can be potent and powerful places. That can be a place where we do our spiritual work. That could be a place of healing. That can be a place where we dwell or ruminate on things that are uncomfortable within us, where we do our shadow work. If we're doing it unconsciously, maybe that's a place you're jammed up in perfectionism. But that's usually where that happens. And so for outsiders, that's what that looked like. Oh, she's daydreaming all the time. So it's constantly off in space. No, I was distracted by a lot. And so they had failed me for the grade. And so that began to be a difficult time. And I want to say that even before that, it stood out that I was different still. Oftentimes, instead of taking off and playing with friends, I was very empathic. I very much preferred to be alone, or the alternative was to be with animals. I have had a lifelong love of all things creepy, crawly, fuzzy, you name it. There isn't anything that I haven't been able to love. The only thing I had a hard time loving at first actually was snakes, and we've talked about that and that lifelong phobia that I've resolved. And actually now sometimes I do find them cute. So I'm quite convinced there isn't anything that I can't love. But my favorite way to escape actually would literally be to leave the house and to go to the pet store around the block, or the one that was about 3 blocks away. I had a few choices of options of places to go and to hang out, but the one that was a block away had a really lovely owner, and she would let me come in and visit with the animals. And that is where the greatest love of all began. She had a ferret that was not necessarily for sale. It was a pet of hers, and she had opted to give it away. That was my first best friend. Now, it wasn't my first pet. We'd had dogs, we'd had cats. My dad at one point had bought me a hamster that was pregnant, and it had rows and rows of babies. But none of them quite connected with me the way the ferret did. And there was something about Lookers was her name, that when I brought her home, we just felt simpatico. I really felt like when I looked into her eyes, like I could see a soul. I could see her personality. I could see her quirks, her likes, her dislikes. When she was really happy about something, or when she was really tired and unwell. And unfortunately, that relationship, it didn't last as long as one might have liked. It had her probably for about 2.5 years. And I want to say maybe she was around 2 when I got her. Ferrets, unfortunately, don't live a very long time, particularly in the way that we feed them and in the way that the breeders put them out in the world. It just leads to their body not working quite optimally, and so often they end up getting cancer and passing away. So to get a ferret to live between 6 to 10 years is actually quite a feat. Especially, I hate to say it, but sometimes the Hagen ferrets seem to last even shorter. And I don't know if it's just because of the way they operate on them from a very young age. And, when they're so tiny like that and they do like these major invasive surgeries, sometimes they miss things and those parts grow. And that leads to bigger hormonal imbalances. And so often ferrets get things like Cushing's disease and a variety of other problems. But so she passed within 2.5 years of me owning her, and I was devastated. Just devastated because I loved her. I loved to bring her everywhere. I'd love to spend time with her. Ferrets have the most adorable, endearing, and warrior spirit when they play. They actually do what is called a weasel war dance, where they oscillate from their front and back feet with their back kind of upturned in a hunch. And if you get them really happy, really excited, they will make a sound called ducking. Ducking. I wish I could grab one of the ferrets downstairs and get them to do it. I don't really have any excitable duckers in my pack right now. I have what is a business of ferrets. When you have multiple, that's what they're called, a business, because they will keep you busy. Right now, I've got 4. And I don't have anyone that I can just go and tickle and get them to make that sound, but lookers would often make that sound, and Daisy, who I got later on, very much even more so. And it's kind of this rapid sound of and they make this high vibrational sound that comes out of them, and it's just so endearing and so fun, and something about it just really connected to me. And so when Lookers passed away, that was very, very hard. And one of the few things that I'd had in elementary school that I actually had a bit of pride in was I would do banking with the school. And sometimes, we would just put in $2 a week into a checking account, and I'd let it build over the years. And so all the while that I had Lookers, I was, investing into this little bank account. She had passed, a year had gone by. We had moved, actually. And when we moved, I started feeling the pangs of kind of loneliness. Like I didn't feel that same connection for the dog or the cat. And I moved away from my mamere. So I wasn't even having my mamere or my prepare on the weekends or after school or anything like that. And so I started to feel really lonely. And I had tried to get a pet rabbit. That didn't work out. I think I still have the scar. It's hard to see now, but yeah, like a little round little scar right there. That's from having owned a rabbit. What I didn't know is animals always leave a scent. Their hormones, their pheromones, whatever. And so if you have a cage that you've used from one type of animal and you use it for another animal, that may not go well. Particularly when one of those animals, a ferret, is predatory to something like a rabbit. And so that rabbit was just a little mini lop or something. He was very tiny, and I'd named him Chico, and we did not have a good run together. I liked him. He was a little aggressive and on edge because he was in that plastic that the ferret was in. And so this poor thing, let's see, I must have been around 11 at that point. And this poor thing is probably living in fight or flight every day of its life because of the scent in the plastic from the cage. But no one knew the wiser. And so anytime I would try to take him out, he would just flip out on me. Like he'd be throwing feet at my face and biting and running, and it was just a lot. And I was actually fairly calm and gentle, so it wasn't like this kid just, mishandling this animal. So that we really didn't understand that, oh, that's not the cage for him. That cage has predatory smells in it. In any case, Chico came to the day where he chewed the wires to my waterbed heater. And that was the end of that. My mother and I went back to the pet store and returned Chico so that he could go live somewhere better suited for him. And I think my mom could see that I had that loneliness and that I'd missed that connection. And so having a ferret was one of the first times where I really felt unconditional love from something and for something. So I think that was really special, and I think she was able to see that. And she reminded me, hey, you've got this bank account. You've been growing for all of these years. I don't mind if you want to get a ferret. And so I did. We placed an order. I want to say the same day that we brought Chico back, I placed an order at the pet store for a little brand new baby ferret. And if you've ever seen a baby ferret, there's nothing like it. They come and they're like tiny. They just could sleep in your hand. I've had ferrets fall asleep in mittens before. They're just so small, with their long, skinny bodies, and they're so sweet. And so that was very exciting. And, we endeavored to get a new cage and everything like that, so that we weren't going to repeat the Chico problem that had happened. So Chico went off to literally go live on a farm. Unlike most animals who, their parents say that, they never actually make it. He actually did get placed somewhere that was going to be appropriate. And so I placed an order for the ferret. Now, as I was doing that, it was off season. And so in Quebec, you could only get ferrets 2 times a year. And typically it was around spring when they would be most available. And I think later years, they kind of improved on that. And now if you go to the pet store, they almost always have one, which is a whole other thing. But for whatever reason, it took a solid 6 to 8 months before my ferret was ready. So one day, by that time, I was 11, probably nearing 12. My mom had come home and her friend was mentioning this great big pet store about an hour's drive. And apparently it was the biggest pet store that they'd ever seen. And so they were endeavoring to take me. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's go see. And I thought, at best, maybe I'll buy a nice big ferret cage and have that fresh start. And so we went to go have a look just to see what there was. I had forgotten my bank stuff. I'd forgotten my card. So we get there, and I did, in fact, find a really lovely cage that I liked, but they had ferrets. They had ferrets that were probably between 6 months to a year old, so they were longer, a little more awkward. They'd had time to just kind of sit in the pet store. And that was like, well, man, my order is taking forever. And I wasn't about to ask. I didn't want to inconvenience anybody, but my mom was like, if you want one, I wouldn't blame you. It's been a long time. We can go home, we can get your banking stuff, and we can come back. So you could buy your cage, and if you want to get a ferret here, you can get a ferret. You can cancel at the other pet store, and that'd be okay. We make the long drive home. It was a very long drive home. And the best part ever that happened, so I was finally feeling happy and excited and knowing that I was going to have this new furry friend come into my life again. And we get home, and as I get in, I happen to look over at the answering machine and see a flashing light. And I go and I press play to see what I've missed. And as I'm listening, the tears start rolling down my face, and I am doubled over with laughter. Because on the way home, I'm thinking, I'm going to get a ferret today. After all this time, I'm going to get a ferret today. The excitement is just building and building. And sure enough, as I listen to the audio recording, it's, oh, Amanda, your ferret is in. You're welcome to come and get her. It's the original pet store that I had placed the order with. And then by this time, I'm over the moon, just elated. So we went ahead and got all of my banking stuff, went to lunch, called the friend, let her know, hey, we are going to come back to that other pet store for a cage, but first Amanda's ferret is ready. So she actually met us for lunch, and I could barely eat. The excitement was just so high at that point. It was hard to even stomach. And so as they were finishing lunch, we were nearby to the pet store. I actually booked it early. I just walked over there, and my mom knew to just kind of let me go and that she'd catch up when she was ready, sort of thing. And I get to the pet store, and I just kind of double check with the lady at the counter, and she's like, "Yeah, she's here. She's right back there." And as I'm walking in, I can see a man and his son looking in an animal, and I'm like, "Oh, what are they looking at?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's my ferret." Um, but she had her back turned to the glass. She was facing away, and she was sleeping. And this weird magnetic thing kind of happened between us, that as I quietly walked in and I stepped, and I was behind the man and his child by a few feet, it's like she could sense me, because she actually turned around. She woke up, turned around, and came to the glass. And for me, it's so hard to explain how potent or powerful that moment felt like. But if I had to define it, I would say at that moment it was like fate. It was like we had chosen this contract together. I was about 11. There was no way to really word all of those things at that age, but that is very much what it felt like. And the people left, and the clerk came over, and she got my ferret out, and I got to actually hold her, and we just started to bond right off the get-go. She kind of looked up at me, and I looked down at her, and we kind of touched noses and had just a beautiful moment of, "Hi, I'm here for you. Here you are for me," kind of deal. And that's where one of the greatest relationships and part of my awakening really began. And so I got her home, and I named her Daisy, kind of because she reminded me of one of the characters from Bambi. Um, and she had a very high vibrational energy, and I loved flowers, so that made sense to me. And so my mom used to laugh and call her Daisy Fresh, because if you've ever smelled a ferret, yeah, they don't smell great. Particularly if you don't clean their blankets or their cage, and then you're like trying to scrub the natural oils out of the ferret, you're gonna have a very bad time. They're not gonna smell like daisies. Um, and so it was interesting, but that first month that I got Daisy home, school had been in session, and so I would get up in the morning, make sure that she had her food. She was still having a mix of like hard food that had to be softened, so I'd fix her food in the morning, and then I would go to school. And I would come home about 3:30, and my mom would say that she'd always know when it was about time for me to come home, because the ferret would actually start crying right about the time that I would walk in the door. So I would walk in the door, and just like a baby, she'd just be crying to see where I'm at. And then I would come and pick her up, and then I'd let her play, and I'd spend time with her, and do whatever homework or things I had to do, and just make sure that her needs were met. And so we formed this beautiful relationship. I loved to play with her, I'd put her on a harness and take her out, take her for runs in the backyard and things. And Daisy had a really great life overall. She saw me through a lot of awkward phases and stages. I had Daisy all the way up until she lived to be about 8. So I think I must have been early 16 years old when she'd started to get sick. And at one point, Daisy had a growth on her arm. And as we got it tested, she had Cushing's disease, and it was a form of cancer that was now growing out of her body. And they didn't have a whole lot of treatment options back then. And also, I lived in a very small town. In that small town, things would shut down, particularly in the winter around Christmas. So we had been working on her health and trying to just keep her comfortable and well and do what we could, while knowing that her time would be coming. And that was really hard because by that time I was so attached. You know, if you've not been loved properly in life, sometimes those first few times where you feel the love of an animal that just accepts you for you is really shifting. It's really important and transformational. And the only other place that I really felt that immensely loved was really my grandmother. I think my mother definitely tried, but I think she had a lot of her own challenges with herself, and sometimes that got in the way. So that was always really important for me, was that connection to animals and pets, and I guess developing and working on my empath nature. And so right about Christmas time, everything shuts down. I'm on break from school. Daisy's getting really sick. And one night, um, I'm just aware that she's really looking at me through the cage of the bars. And I've heard other pet owners describe this as the look. And she's giving me that look of, I'm tired. And so I'm looking at her through the pet bars. And as I'm looking at her and I'm trying to feel or sense what's happening or what she needs, I'm using my clear empathy unconsciously. I get an image in my mind of Beth. And I don't think, oh, I don't stop there and I'm like, oh, that's a clairvoyant message. No, I'm like, oh, you want a bath. Okay. And so I'm preparing her a really nice warm bath. I've got some suds in there and it's warming up. And I put her in and I'm just, lightly getting her used to the water and getting her comfortable and spending a bit of time, massaging the soap in, and she's enjoying it for the most part. And so as I'm doing that, then another clairvoyant image kind of pops in. And I'm getting this image in my mind of me holding her head under the water. And I panic and at that moment, I'm like, how could I think of something like that? That's horrific. And so because I'm upset by what I had just seen in my mind's eye, I rinse her off, I pull her out of the tub, and I take her to dry off, and we head back to my room. And at that moment, I didn't have the awareness. I was very young still. I mean, 16, I was pretty immature. I wasn't aware that at that point she was probably really in pain and sending a telepathic message of, please, like, have compassion, some mercy. In any case, she was asking the wrong person because I wouldn't have been able to do that. Even still, I couldn't do that. Like, I would find that so hard. Even with my pets now, I've always had a hard time with that aspect, not of saying goodbye, because as a medium, it's not a full goodbye, but still having to make that judgment call, that choice, and having power over someone's life like that has always been so uncomfortable for me, even still. So here I am, almost 41 years old, and I still can't tell the story without feeling the emotionality of it kind of rise up. So that was tough. But I set her on my bed and I started to dry her off with the towel, and I used the hair dryer, and so she was nice and warm and kind of just, sleeping in a ball. And we were there together for hours. And I'd, asked my dad, can we take her to the vet? And he's like, well, everything is closed. It'll have to wait until morning, because I want to say this was like after Christmas Day, and somewhere between Christmas Eve and Boxing Day, right around that area. And everything was just closed. There was no one available within measure at that time. And so we were prepared to make the drive and take her somewhere the next day if need be. And so I was just keeping her as comfortable as possible. And as the hours were wearing on, where I was just quietly stroking her and holding her, she really didn't have much energy. There was no real play in her at that point. So it was just loving her with all that I had in those final moments. as it started to get really late, I didn't want to fall asleep and either roll over her and crush her in my sleep, because she was so small, or have her wake up and wander off somewhere in the house and then need help and me not be able to find her. Because if you know anything about ferrets, they have a proclivity and a just an overall pro ability to hide things and hide in places. I've had ferrets crawl into sofas and we'd searched hours and not been able to find them. So I didn't want that to happen. And so I had placed her cage right next to my bed, and I kind of slept with my hand in the cage, just kind of keeping awareness on and with her as I inevitably fell asleep and couldn't stay awake anymore. And at some point during the night, I'd started to have awareness, and this whole other experience took place. And I thought this would be easier to do over a podcast than I did writing a book. It doesn't feel easier at this moment. I will do my best I can to make sense of this, but I was 16 and fairly young, and this was probably my first major spiritual awakening. So, as I was sleeping, I began to have awareness as though it felt kind of like I was outside of my body, like I could see my body, but I was like standing behind my head. And I could see that on the foot of the bed, there was Daisy towards my feet. And I could hear her speaking to me. And as she's speaking to me, I don't know why I wasn't perplexed about how is this happening, but there was a very fluid conversation, and I could actually hear her in my voice saying, "Thank you, I love you. Thank you for everything you've given me. I'm going to miss you." And if that wasn't surprising and shocking enough, I also had awareness of hearing what felt like my own soul speak back to her. And I was having awareness of like my mouth isn't moving, like, so on one hand, the conscious mind is aware of I'm in some kind of a state in between. I'm not awake, but I'm not sleeping. My mouth isn't moving. And yet I could hear my soul saying back to her, "Thank you. I love you. I'm going to miss you so much. I miss you already," kind of thing. And all while that is happening, I become aware of a really bright white light. And so consciously, I'm like, she's dying. I should be so sad. I should be crying and upset. But then on the other hand, with the presence of the light, it had this feeling and this glow, this emanation of unconditional love is the best way that I can word it. But we don't really have words for that here. It felt like love that permeated every single cell of my being. And I felt so loved and so whole and so complete in that moment that it's like, even though consciously I knew she was passing away, and I knew that when I woke up in the morning, there would just be the shell of her, I couldn't feel that sadness in that moment. It's like it wasn't even available because I felt wrapped and embraced and held in this unconditional love. And not just this unconditional love, but as that light was shining down, it also felt like I was receiving things. It felt like I was understanding things at a different level. And so that's a really wild and big experience to have, particularly at 16. And I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my mom or my stepdad or anybody. I didn't even tell my high school sweetheart who I had dated for 7 years. I didn't even tell him. I literally didn't tell anybody. I didn't utter a word of this experience that I'd had, that profoundly and utterly changed me. And I think part of it was because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I had anybody who would understand. I mean, sure, I would have loved to have told my mama, but by that time we lived even further away, and the distance in our relationship had really grown because I didn't get to see her and we didn't really talk on the phone very much. But I really didn't feel like anyone could comprehend, and also there was the fear. There's the fear of, oh my God, they're gonna think I'm crazy. They're they're gonna want to medicate me or age. I didn't realize that I had essentially just met Source. I had just met God, at least my interpretation of God. But I do know that from that day forward, I never had a fear of death. I've not had a fear of death even since. And it's because that realization of, oh my goodness, oh my God, this is where we come from, had occurred. And it wasn't just, this is where we come from. It's also, this is where we return to. So that's kind of a lot, particularly at that age and that maturity level. And so to say that that moment was a catalyst for everything that followed is an understatement. Absolutely an understatement. Because from then on, I really began my spiritual journey. I really began looking to define the experience that I'd had. Looking to understand what made me different. And wanting to experience that love, that connection, that all encompassing feeling again. Now, when we have these spiritual awakenings at this level, when you actually have, and some people have defined this as a near-death experience. While it wasn't my death, I was experiencing her death. But it can come with that feeling of encompassing unconditional love. But when you experience something like that at that level, there is a sadness, there is a longing, there is a searching, an attachment that can happen when you've had something really beautiful just encompass you. And the feeling of this was so palpable. It really felt like so thick, like I could cut it. It felt so tangible and real that I didn't question it. And it was definitely more than a dream, that's for certain. And of course, when I did wake up, she was gone. And then we had to proceed with burying her and everything like that. So, yeah, I know it was definitely more than a dream. And so as you think back with me here, that moment when I saw her in the cage being unwell and I had that awareness and she gave me the look and I saw the image of the bath, several things happened there. One, I was tapped into my clear empathy. I was feeling that something was unwell. She needed my time and my attention. Two, telepathy was happening and clairvoyance was happening. And then claircognizance was happening. All of these things were occurring. As I was warming her up on the bed, I knew that she felt a level of cold in her bones. So I had used the hairdryer to warm her up and to give her that heat. One could say that's clairtangency. As I was holding her in my hands, I knew that she was having that experience within her body, within her bones, and that she needed that. And for me, it wasn't even a thought. It was just, oh, you need this. Okay. Let me give you anything I can give you. Anything you need. let me supply. So in that moment, I was unconditionally loving as well. So it's wild to me that we had this fated kind of connection and this love, this enjoyment of each other's lives. And in her passing, she awakened all of my spiritual abilities to the point where I could no longer be unconscious of them. I feel like sometimes childhood was easy to go through because there were those moments of not being conscious of it all. But then to be 16, that's really it's a really complicated, important age, particularly for girls. And then to again be different, and then to be different in a way that you're like super conscious of it, of oh wow, I'm so weird, was just so difficult and strange. Sorry. It's so hard to share this one thing, and it's not sad, it's actually really beautiful. And sometimes when I remember it, sometimes I can have a fleeting feeling of that unconditional love and that sense of connection, that sense of unity. And so I just want to say, like, within that light, with that light permeating my whole being, my sense in that moment was, if everyone in the world could feel that, we would never hurt each other. We could never knowingly, intentionally, purposefully do harm to any other single living being. And I'm not trying to put myself on any kind of a pedestal here. I'm certainly, like not, I'm not a vegan. I do enjoy, a natural ketogenic diet, which is sometimes very carnivore. I'm not talking about at that level. Yes, culturally, that is, and societally, that is something that we do. But I'm talking about um, the interconnectedness of each and every one of us. Ultimately, and I think it was Mother Teresa who said it best, we belong to each other, and we really wholly and fully do. We belong to each other. And so I think if everybody could have a sense of what I'd experienced in that light, in that night, everybody would behave so incredibly differently. And whether we could define or not what that light was or what it meant, or where it goes to, no one would ever behave in some of the ways that they do. That sense of ego, that sense of isolation, that insecurity that people live out of, I just don't believe it would exist if everybody had that experience. So it did. It changed me forever. And as if that wasn't a complex enough experience to have had, I did it utterly alone. I didn't tell a soul until way later in life. I didn't start divulging that experience to anyone until at least a decade, maybe a bit more later. And I think maybe that's why sometimes it's still vulnerable to share, because I held it for so long and held it to myself and kept it so secret. But I do know that it changed me, and I do know that it changed my view of life. It changed my view of death. It made me question every single belief that I'd had in that moment. And from there on, I became an incredible pain in everybody's bottom. And I became a pain in their bottoms because then I was no longer just willing to accept and comply with other people's beliefs or demands if it didn't vibrate at that same level of that spiritual awakening that I'd had. So after an awakening like that, how we talked about spiritual healing crisis in that other episode, I believe that happened. I believe I had a little bit of spiritual healing crisis after. And that looked like depression. That looked like isolation, being moody, not fitting in. And that wasn't the whole of the year, but I definitely had a lot of moments like that. Now, I was fortunate to be in a really committed, loving relationship in high school. And it was a really healthy relationship for the most part. I think there were times when I was definitely the more insecure person out of both of us. And so I think there were times where maybe I was a bit selfish. And part of that was due to immaturity too. But overall, it was a good relationship. And so I had that, and that was really helpful. And that came with a couple of friendships as well. And I'm the kind of person who, when I friend, I typically friend people for life. And I tend to be someone who will always be around within a certain level of connectedness so long as I'm being well treated. And so I still have some of those friendships, and we still, check in here and there a little bit. And so for that, I mean, I still did things that I enjoyed. I still went snowboarding and loved to dance and listen to music and be creative. Still loved movies and doing things. But there could be times where it felt like then I had awareness. Not to say there was a void, because I don't think there was a void, but I did have awareness of, oh, that unconditional love, like just to be bathed in within that. Because when I was feeling that light, it's like, oh, I don't want or need for anything. It's like, yes, this has happened. This is sad. I have everything I need. I feel whole. I feel complete. I'm entirely encompassed. I am protected. I am safe. I am unconditionally loved by something that I don't understand. And it's not just me. And so sometimes when I do my meditations and things, I will often say in the salt cave to the meditators that come, of you are unconditionally and profoundly loved more than you know. And it comes from that place, it comes from that knowing. Because it's not just me, that support, that level of love, that connection exists for all of us, for everyone. So that was my first major spiritual awakening. And here we are. I'm 41 now, and I still am putting pieces together and trying to understand it. Trying to have the bigger sense of it. I didn't realize that I actually experienced what I would define as source. I didn't even put that together like 3 or 4 years ago. That's only more recent of, holy crap. That literally, was something so much bigger than I was thinking it was in that moment. And then from that moment, the mediumship abilities really took off. And then I did experience sometimes Daisy visiting. I had a lot more dreams at that point, and more spiritual occurrences started happening because I was open. And because I was open, I drew things in, energies, entities, different kinds of being. And so often when I've got brand new mediums that I'm working with and I'm training, something I let them know is, in spirit, it's like you become a lighthouse in the dark. And as you vibrate higher, as you shine for others, but also others can see you. And sometimes if they've been in the dark for a very long time, that light looks very comforting. It looks very fulfilling. And things will want to come and take that light. And so there also needs to be a layer of boundary, a layer of protection, a discerning, a choosing of who we allow to access that light on any given day. So after that point, I began to research. I began a quest looking and learning of as many different kinds of religions as I possibly could. I looked at Hinduism, I looked at Buddhism, I looked at Islam, I looked at paganism, which eventually led me to Wicca. And Wicca was a fit for quite a few years. It was a fit because it was the one place where I could hear, read, and understand things about my abilities and who I was that weren't being defined anywhere else. And that felt like a balm. It felt soothing. It felt good to know of, oh, there are other people in the world. Oh, there are these things called mediums. There are these things called empaths and intuitives. There are people who are practicing healing modalities like Reiki. And so on my 16th birthday, it felt a little bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy because as a little girl, I used to watch many, many movies with my mama. We used to have what she would call junk night. Every Friday, she would send me with a couple of dollars down to the dollar store. And I would come back with chips and chocolate, and she would get the TGIF movie lineup ready, and she would have tons of VHS videos ready to go. A classic favorite of ours was a movie called Teen Witch. And Teen Witch is essentially about a girl who comes into her power on her 16th birthday. You can't make this junk up. And essentially, I feel like that's somehow what I ended up doing. I ended up coming into my power on my 16th birthday. And so, as my parents were planning a surprise birthday party, I was utterly oblivious. One, because I always kind of felt shocked that I even made it to live that long, to be 16 years old. I was kind of having a sense of disbelief just from trauma and challenges that had happened. And then two, I was engrossed in a deep spiritual study. By this time, I was reading books. I was doing internet searches. I was in the library looking for things. I began to do things like practice yoga. Um, I eventually went on to learn belly dance and had some spiritual awakenings and kundalini awakenings within yoga and belly dance then. I'll actually come back to those later and possibly more in depth because that was a different level of awakening and that felt like it was more within the body, more within the cell tissue. Whereas the awakening with Daisy, that felt more at the psyche, more at the soul level of a greater understanding of, okay, we were a part of so much more than we are aware of. And that place that we come from is ideal, and that place we return to is ideal. So everything that happens in between is just a blip. And we just do our best because we know where we're going and we want to make sure that we are still allowed in, I guess. Maybe that's some of that old Christian dogma still hanging around in my head from being a child. But yeah, I began delving and searching and looking, and even then I had had some really fascinating experiences still. So as I found Wicca and paganism and started to have a sense of identity of who I was and what I believed, I really got uncomfortable because then I really didn't fit in. And it seemed like the more that I started to bring that out in society, the more that wasn't really welcomed. But let's save that for another episode. Thank you for sitting through today with me as I shared that first really deep spiritual awakening. It's not one that I share readily. I share it when I feel like people are really going to benefit and maybe have a sense for themselves of a peace and a trust and a knowing that you are so profoundly loved beyond measure and you belong to something and you're going to return to it one day. So do your best, be your best, but trust There is something bigger than you, and death really isn't something to fear. It's just a transition. And that's really the only times that I share that. And when I'm explaining to people what it was like to have that spiritual awakening and have all of my abilities, my mediumship, my clairvoyance, my clairsentience, my clairempathy, clairtangency, all of it come online all at once. And so it's called trauma and transcendence for a reason. Losing Daisy in that way was traumatic, particularly at that age, that maturity level. But man, that experience, I really felt like I touched transcendence that day. And there have been some wild experiences where I can say I feel like I have had a touch and a taste of nirvana even after that. Ooh, but those experiences, they just change you at your essence, at your core, and there's really no going back after that. And it's really hard to buy in or look at the world in any different way after that. Hopefully, this helps you begin to understand me a little bit more. I have a whole lot more that I want to share with you. And as you're listening to this, I hope you are beginning to reflect on your own experiences as well. And that when you're hearing about when I experienced what telepathy was like or what clairvoyance was like, that you're having clearing moments of understanding your own encounters with these abilities, because again, they aren't supernatural, they are natural, and we all have them. And that is, I feel, probably the biggest message that I have to bring and to share with the world of, yes, you have these abilities, they are baked in. It's intentional, they are God-given, and you can trust them. And you can trust that you will be loved and cherished and cared for wherever you go at the end of your days. So after hearing me cry and blubber and get incredibly vulnerable, I hope that this episode helps you get in touch with that deeper essence and knowing within yourself, and to begin to see your own abilities, your own experiences for the rich spiritual tapestry that they actually are. This is just one part of many more things that I want to share with you, but definitely one of the deeper ones. So thank you for sitting through this with me, and I wish you very, very bright blessings. Let me know what you thought of this episode. I'd love to hear your comments or answer any questions that arise for you. Okay, bye for Thank you for joining us on this transformative episode of Trauma and Transcendence. Your stories matter. I would love to hear them and from you. Connect on our website, healingbeyondtrauma.com, or drop me an email at amanda@healingbeyondtrauma.com. Remember, healing is a journey we take together. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired. This is Amanda, wishing you bright blessings.